In our last episode, we looked at why crime clusters in space, how hotspots form, shift, and sometimes disappear. But what if the clustering isn't just spatial? What if it's social? Because crime doesn't just move across streets, it moves through relationships. And that's where person based analytics comes in. A world where models don't just predict where crime might happen, but who might be involved. Today on Curious Modeling, we're exploring the human network, how person based crime analytics work, the data they rely on, and the ethical questions they raise. When analysts talk about person based models, they're not just tracking individuals, they're modeling relationships. Imagine a network where each node is a person, and each connection represents some kind of tie: shared address, co-arrest, gang affiliation, social media contact, even being in the same incident report. Now imagine mapping that across an entire city. Patterns begin to emerge, not just clusters of geography, but clusters of people. This is the foundation of social network analysis, or SNA. It's used everywhere, from marketing to epidemiology. But in policing, it's often used to identify who's most likely to become involved in violence, either as a perpetrator or as a victim. Social network analysis looks at three things: nodes, the individual's edges, the connections between them, and centrality, how important each person is within that web. If someone has many strong connections, say co-arrests, known associates, or recurring contacts, they might rank high in degree centrality. Others might be less connected, but act as bridges between groups, high in betweenness centrality. From a modeling perspective, this is powerful. It turns relationships into data. But it also means the model's understanding of risk depends on who you know and how you're connected, not just what you've done. That's a major shift, from behavior to association. In the 2000s, cities like Chicago, New Orleans, and Los Angeles began developing person-based predictive models, often called risk scoring systems. One of the most famous was Chicago's Strategic Subject List, or SSL. The idea was to identify people most likely to be involved in gun violence, either as victims or offenders, using data from arrests, gang affiliations, and co-offending networks. Each individual received a numerical risk score, often ranging from 0 to 500. Higher scores were meant to signal higher risk. It was predictive analytics meets public safety, a way to allocate intervention resources proactively. At least that was the goal. But when outside researchers reviewed the SSL, they found troubling results. The model overpredicted risk for young black men and failed to account for how policing patterns shaped the data itself. So instead of breaking cycles of violence, it risked reinforcing them. Most person-based risk models work a lot like credit scoring. They take dozens of variables: arrests, prior victimization, age, social network ties, even the number of times someone's name appears in an incident report, and calculate a single probability of future involvement. Mathematically, it's similar to logistic regression or machine learning classifiers. But unlike a credit score, the outcome here isn't missing a payment. It's potential involvement in violence. And that makes every false positive a big deal. The models don't predict intent. They don't understand context. They just recognize patterns in past data. And sometimes those patterns reflect decades of unequal enforcement. This is where the promise of analytics meets its moral boundary. If your model is built on biased data, arrests, surveillance, or social networks mapped unevenly, your risk scores will inherit that bias. They'll look objective, but they'll encode inequality. A low-income neighborhood with more police presence will produce more records, which increases network connectivity, which raises risk scores. So the algorithm starts acting like a mirror that amplifies what it reflects. Not because it's malicious, but because it's mathematical. The more data you give it, the more confident it becomes, even when it's confidently wrong. So what's the solution? Some agencies are moving toward transparency dashboards, where every variable in a risk model is documented and audited. Others are using ethical AI frameworks, where fairness and interpretability are tested just like accuracy. And many reformers are rethinking the purpose entirely, using person-based analytics not to forecast arrests, but to direct social services. Who might need housing support, mental health care, or mediation before violence happens? The same math that once ranked risk can also rank opportunity. Person-based analytics remind us that models don't just describe the world, they influence it. When we score people, we don't just predict outcomes, we shape them. And that's why transparency, accountability, and human oversight matter more than ever. Data can help prevent harm, but it can also define it. In our next episode, we'll look at the bigger question: bias in the machine. how data, algorithms, and assumptions quietly steer what we call justice.